أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين الغرر الميامين، سيما بقية الله في الأراضين وحجته على الخلائق أجمعين، سيدنا وإمام زماننا وصاحب نعمتنا وولي أمرنا مهدي هذه الأمة وطاووس أهل الجنة الحجة بن الحسن العسكري، فداه أرواح العالمين. Brothers and sisters in faith, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It is indeed a pleasure to be amongst you. It is the 8th Annual UMAA Convention. I attended 2 or 3, making this my 4th participation in the conference. Alhamdulillah, I think when the seeds of this conference were planted back in 2003, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of hope rested on bringing together the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, Muslims in general, but particularly the followers of the Ahlul Bayt, onto the same forum to have ideas discussed and strategies built for the betterment of our community as well as the larger Muslim community in the United States of America. And alhamdulillah, much of those goals and aspirations have been reached. There is still much left to do, however. Let me begin by quoting a poetic verse. The poet is a man by the name of Elia Abu Madi. Elia Abu Madi was a Maronite Christian, born into a Maronite Christian family, but ended up becoming an atheist. He was from Lebanon originally, then he went to Egypt, became a linguist and a poet, and he compiled his poetry in a book that he called At-Talasim, the Talismos. And in that book, there is one fundamental message that he's trying to put across. The message is, I do not know what the heck I'm talking about. The statement that is recurring throughout the poem from beginning to end is this: Lastu adri, I do not know. He says, for example, in the verse that I would like to quote, the following. He says, جئت لا أعرف من أين ولكني أتيت ولقد أبصرت قدامي طريقا فمشيت كيف جئت كيف أبصرت طريقي لست أدري. And he keeps on saying لست أدري لست أدري. I came, but from where I do not know. I can see my path before me, but where does this path lead me to? I do not know. How do I see my path? How do I go about my life? I do not know. I do not know. Now, it is amusing when we hear that. The fact of the matter is, however, that this is a recurring theme in the lives of many people. And the risk is that we, yes, even we as Muslims, as devout followers of the message of the Holy Prophet and his infallible family, we also find ourselves every once in a while in a similar predicament where we simply don't know. We don't know what our mission is. We don't know what we're supposed to do at times of crisis. We don't know how to solve our problems. We don't know how to uplift ourselves and our families and our communities and face the challenges of the 21st century, especially in a post-9/11 world where the amount of scrutiny that is subjected upon Muslims is just simply horrendous. And we've all seen or experienced instances in our lives where we find ourselves once again asking whether we know or do not know what we're supposed to do. Now, Imam al-Sadiq, our 6th Imam, has a beautiful statement in which he says, العارف بزمانه لا تهجم عليه اللوابس. He who understands his time will never fall victim to confusion. Lawabis, al-labs means to confuse, to deceive. If you fully understand the times in which you live, if you understand the challenges, then you're more likely to understand the solutions to those challenges. If you don't know what's going on around you, if you fail to understand those challenges, then you're going to fall victim to confusion. And so if you analyze the lives of those who could be categorized, who could be characterized, I should say, as successful individuals, first of all, most people are not successful by any measure. If we're talking about financial success, you'll find that most people are just content with a mediocre kind of lifestyle. They're just happy that there's enough food on the table and that gets them through the day. If we're talking in financial, in a financial sense. If we're talking about spirituality, once again, most people are just content with what they have. Which is why traditions tell us that when it comes to spirituality, when it comes to piety, when it comes to devotion, you need to compare yourself to those who are higher than you. But when it comes to monetary value, when it comes to financial success, you should always compare yourself to those who are lower than you. That way, you strive for what really matters in your life. You strive for spiritual perfection, as opposed to consuming your life with attaining greater financial success and eventually losing out on what matters, which is spirituality and devotion to our faith and our ideals and our principles. But those who are successful, we're talking about the top 1%, as they're often referred to. What characteristics do they enjoy that allows them to be successful? I think this is very important, because the reason we're all here today, brothers and sisters, is to achieve success. What we're trying to do is to change, to create a fundamental change in our personal lives, in our societies, in order to overcome the colossal challenges and obstacles that we see in today's America, and to uplift the Muslim community to its deserved position in society. So those who are successful could probably be categorized into 3 tiers. Let's talk about those for a short while. The first group of successful individuals are the ones who not only understand the challenges of their time, not only appreciate the opportunities available to them and know the world in which they live, which, as we said, is crucial in order to succeed, but they are open to the idea and they are flexible to changes as they occur. We may be sitting down here talking about creating change, and we're all open to the idea of accommodating change in our lives. The truth is, however, if you were to sit down and look at this and scrutinize it with a greater measure, you'll find that we're all, at some level, we're all very hostile to the idea of change. Nobody likes change because we're used to a certain lifestyle. There is a status quo that we'd like to maintain. And so change is never a welcome thing at first sight. You only create change when you realize what a desperate state you're in, and it's only then that you're open to the idea of change. So most people are not successful precisely because of that. The first group of successful individuals, as we said, are the ones that are flexible to the idea of change. They're the ones who welcome change with open arms. They're the ones who say, I don't have a problem with change if the times call for any modifications. A very basic example of that, to make it clearer, is when you have these traditional business models that are based on older mechanisms and older apparatus in the business world. For example, people who have a store on, in some downtown district, they sell a certain product, they do it, they do it in a very old-fashioned way. If they want to be successful, they need to realize that change is coming. And so they prepare for that change by saying, you know what, I need to take my business to the next level. Instead of relying on the old, conventional, traditional, orthodox business model, I now need to establish some sort of a web presence, for example. They set up a website, and then they have a store, an online store, and so on and so forth. So that's the first tier, and I don't want to delve too much into this because we have more to cover later. The second tier, the second group of successful individuals who are even more successful than the first, is the group of people that are able to analyze the world in which they live, to take the ideas and to understand the challenges, to appreciate the opportunities in order to foresee the change. These are the people who could see around the corner. These are the individuals who can somehow, given all the information available at the time, they could predict what the next killer app is going to be, as they say. They can predict what the gadgets that are going to be game changers are going to be. They're the ones who can predict where the money is in 10 years' time, in 20 years' time, in 50 years' time, not just today. A very basic, common sense example of that is when Google bought YouTube for a whopping $1 billion. $1 billion is a huge figure, especially when you're talking about a website, which essentially is a bunch of bits and bytes. There's not much that is tangible in the business model. And yet, for Google to invest 1% of its net worth, at the time I think Google's prices were a lot higher than today, it was worth around $100 billion. To invest 1% of its total net worth on a website tells you that these are a bunch of individuals who can predict what's coming in the future. They know what the next wave is going to hold. And of course today, YouTube is a website that attracts 2 billion visitors a day. 2 billion. 1/3 of the world's population visits YouTube on a daily basis. Which is probably why when, during economic downturns, a lot of people talk about, especially in the UK, they had this huge controversy, as well as the US, about CEO bonuses and salaries and so forth. And they say, when we're going through such tough times, especially when there is a government bailout that is essentially saving these companies from going bust, we shouldn't be paying these huge amounts of money to these CEOs, to these executives. And I'm not trying to defend them, but what I do say is that these individuals are the brains behind the company. These are the people who can predict the future. They're the ones who bring in the cash. And so you can really never put a price tag on that ability. And I think if we wanted to apply this principle, the ability to not only accommodate change in our lives, but also to predict the future trends based on information and analysis that's available to us right now on the subject matter, on our state as Muslims in America, or across the world for that matter. I'm not an American, nor do I live in America, but generally speaking, Muslims around the world, especially in the Western world. If we were to apply that, I would say this. If you go to Google actually has a special website in which it records the number of searches and queries and distributes those in accordance with the different countries and regions, and even down to the different cities from which those queries originate. It's called Google Trends, and if you go there, you'll find some very fascinating insight about what people are searching for. For example, if you type in the word Islam, who do you think, which country in the world would be most interested in the word Islam on Google.com. The #1 country is Indonesia. Where is Indonesia? Indonesia is a country that occupies no space whatsoever in the Muslim psyche. Yes, I know it's the biggest Muslim country. Yes, I know it has the biggest Muslim population. Yes, I know President Obama grew up in that country. But that's as far as we're willing to go. Indonesia is not on the Muslim radar whatsoever. Who's thinking about Indonesia? Who's thinking about propagating the message of the Ahlul Bayt to Indonesians? Hardly anyone's doing that. And by the way, there's a huge population, there's a huge community of the followers of Ahlul Bayt in Indonesia who are originally from Yemen. And obviously there's a resurgence of the Ahlul Bayt school of thought around the world, and Indonesia is no exception to the rule. But who's thinking about it? No one. The second country in terms of searches on the word Islam is not Saudi Arabia, it's not Iran, it's none of these, it's not Egypt, it's none of these Muslim countries that you would normally think of. It's Malaysia. Again, who's thinking of Malaysia? Brothers and sisters, if we want to survive, if we want to be successful in our missions, we need to look at these trends and predict the future and know where our priorities should lie. And again, we're not doing that. Now, let's leave the word Islam aside for a moment. I tried another word, Shia. Never try that, because you'll come up with Shia LaBeouf, the American Jewish actor, right? Which is something that Google should try to address. Seriously, it's confusing. People write Shia and they get this actor. I think what they need to do is somehow make a distinction. So what I did was, I typed in Shiite. Now this is fascinating. This is really interesting. Can you guess which country is the one that searches for Shiite the most? Anything? Any wild guess? The United States of America. And the #1 city searching for the word Shiite, the city you're sitting in right now, Washington, D.C. In terms of countries, the first is the US, the second is Canada, the third is Australia, the fourth is the UK, the fifth is France, the sixth is Germany. Not a single Muslim country in there. And in terms of cities, all the top 12 cities are American. DC, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, San Diego, San Francisco, and so on and so forth. They're all searching for Shiite. Brothers and sisters, this speaks volumes about a couple of different things. The first is the thirst that exists in the Western world for the Ahlul Bayt school of thought. There is such an immense amount of thirst that's not being quenched by our own doing. We're not doing anything about it. In fact, to prove that we're not doing anything about it, did you know that our most important collection of ahadith, of prophetic narrations and the words of the Imams, is, as you all know, Al-Kafi Sharif. The single most important collection of hadith in the Shia world. And yet, even that book has not yet been translated into English. Why? Sahih al-Bukhari has been translated 10 times. Sahih Muslim has multiple translations. Al-Kafi hasn't been translated. This shows how indifferent we are. And I'm sorry to say this. I'm talking about myself first and foremost, and the larger community. We're so indifferent. We're just not able to translate. And I'm not talking about verbatim translations, literal translations. The Ahlul Bayt school of thought has not been translated properly into a language that the Western culture could understand. Whereas, let me give you another example that again is very shocking. You're all familiar with James Cameron's blockbuster Avatar, which was released last year. Now, the movie itself, there's so much for it, there's so much against it. Its underlying message is basically one of ecology. It tries to promote the idea of nature being the source of creation and the worshipping of nature and Mother Nature and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of reservations that we have against the movie. That's not the point. But the one thing that the movie was able to achieve was to create a sense of thirst and hunger for something truly amazing, truly worthless, while also very amazing. What's that? The Na'avi culture. These indigenous people who are in the movie, they have their own language. The language is Na'avi. It sounds funny if you listen to it. Did you know there are over 400,000 websites on the internet discussing not the movie, not the plot, not the script, not the special effects, not the actors, but the Na'avi culture and the Na'avi language. There's even a Na'avi translator online. You can type in the English statements and it gets translated into Na'avi. There is a growing community, brothers and sisters. This puts us all to shame, I swear. There is a growing community online of people who have mastered the Na'avi language. And we think Arabic is difficult? We think it's too hard to translate the kafi into English? People, listen, if they're interested in something, if you can generate enough excitement about a certain thing, people will pursue it at any cost. The hadith that my brother mentioned of Imam al-Rida alayhi salatu wasalam, who says, لَوْ عَرِفَ النَّاسِ مَحَاسِنَ كَلَامِنَا لَاتَّبَعُونَ. If only people were given the chance to see the exquisite beauty of our words, they would follow us. They'd come after us. We don't have to go after them. We don't have to force it down their throat. La ikraha fi din is a Quranic statement that is manifested fully only in the Ahlul Bayt school of thought. Well, you don't have to force anything on anyone. Just show it to them and they'll follow you. So we need to be able to conduct a SWOT analysis, brothers and sisters. You know, we do this in business all the time. If we have a candy selling business in some corner store, we do SWOT analyses where we analyze the strengths, the weaknesses, the threats, and the opportunities. Why is it that when it comes to tabligh, when it comes to the propagation of the message of Islam and the Ahlul Bayt, there is no SWOT analysis? There is never really any serious discussion about the most effective means of doing what we're supposed to do, which is to preach the message of the Ahlul Bayt, a message that is unlike any other. And I'll mention some examples later on, inshallah. So that's the second tier of successful people. The third and final tier of people who could be categorized as truly successful are the ones who not only are open to the idea of change, not only do they make modifications in their lives to accommodate change, not only are they flexible when it comes to change, not only are they able to predict the change, but they are the change. They're the people who realize that there needs to be something done in order for us to uplift ourselves. They're not the thermometer, but the thermostat. They're not a mere reflection of reality, but the ones who dictate what reality must be. They're the ones who actually create the change in their communities and thereby create the change in their host nations. We, brothers and sisters, have failed at the first step. Where we need to be is the third step. It is the third group, the third category. We need to be right up there. Knowing the world in which we live, knowing what we must do, predicting what's going to happen in 10 years' time. I was at the airport in San Francisco and I went to the bookstore and there was a book that caught my attention. I think the title was something along the lines of the next 100 years or so. And I started reading a little bit of the book, and I thought it was fascinating in the sense that the author is seen as an individual with a great deal of foresight. He could predict many events that would happen in the future, things like wars, things like famine, natural disasters, so on and so forth. And he says that in the year 2050, there's going to be a war between the United States and one of the world's greatest superpowers at that time. Which country is that? Russia? No. Turkey. He predicts that Turkey, now I hope that no war will ever happen, but what's interesting about the prediction is that he sees Turkey as a global superpower in a mere 40 years' time. We need to create that change, brothers and sisters. Now, having said that, I think it's important to reflect back. In the year 61, in the Hijri calendar, 685, if I'm not mistaken, Gregorian, the master of the youth of paradise, Imam al-Hussein, was massacred. His tiny army of family members, children, nephews, brothers, and 72 companions were brutally murdered and suffered a crushing defeat by an army of 30,000 people armed to the teeth in the land of Karbala. On that day, you could argue that the message of the Ahlul Bayt, if you were there, you could easily conclude that Ahlul Bayt, their message, their mission, their wisdom came to an abrupt halt and became completely extinct. In fact, Imam Zayn al-Abidin alayhi salam says that on the day of Ashura, there were only 7 households around the world who loved us, the Ahlul Bayt, who pledged their allegiance to us. Now fast forward 14 centuries, that number, 7, is now over, and I stand to be challenged on this statistic because I've done my homework and I led a study that came to this conclusion. The number of the followers of Ahlul Bayt today is over 500 million people worldwide. 500 million. Don't believe the ones who tell you they represent 2% of the Muslim population. Don't believe the official statistics of countries like Saudi Arabia, who do not even recognize their Shia population as citizens of the country, even though they number over 3 million people. And they're the ones we know of. There's a huge segment of the population that is too afraid to express their views and to express their beliefs because they fear persecution. 500 million people today. Now, it's important for us, brothers and sisters, to sit down every once in a while and try to figure out, how did we get from 7 to 500 million when our history was anything but rosy? It was anything but comfortable. It was anything but a smooth sailing. In fact, at certain times, and you know this, the very name Ali was banned. No one could name their children Ali. In fact, one day, Hajjaj, this despotic tyrant, Ibn Yusuf al-Thaqafi, he meets a man, he asks him about his name. He said, "What's your name?" The man was so embarrassed and so fearful of Hajjaj's wrath that he responded by saying, "Inna ahli zalamuni." My family oppressed me. They didn't treat me properly. They gave me a terrible name. They named me Ali. Hajjaj said to him, "Na'am, innahum qad zalamuk." Yes, you're right. They did indeed oppress you by giving you this name. There were times in our history where the head of state, Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, the head of state, imagine the president coming out with a presidential decree saying, "Unzuru man rawa hadithan an Abi Turab." Anyone who narrates a single narration from Ali ibn Abi Talib, فَاحْذِفُوهُ مِنَ الدِّيوَانِ. احذفوه من الديوان meant to strip that individual of their citizenship. Imagine that, a single hadith, and you're a stateless man in the city of Isfahan in Iran, and in the process of renovating it, a wall fell and they discovered this huge library of books behind it. And they discovered this book, Al-Ma'alim. It is 6 times the size of Bihar al-Anwar. 600 volumes. I mean, which culture, seriously, which culture, which civilization, which country, which nation has left us with such an immense amount of knowledge? And we're not just talking about volume, by the way. It's not just the size of what we've inherited from the Imams. it's also the substance. Let me give you an example. Lao Tzu, who's a famous Chinese philosopher, he's got, and I'm not sure about the exact figure, but something along the lines of 100, 200 words of wisdom that have been collected. And he's been one of the most influential Chinese philosophers throughout history, ever. Lao Tzu has words of wisdom, which aren't too bad. I mean, don't get me wrong, and I mean no disrespect whatsoever to the Chinese civilization. But I mean, he's got words like, and I just want to compare one of his words with that of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Ali ibn Abi Talib is the one who says, نَحْنُ أُمَرَاءُ الْكَلَامِ, we are the masters of oratory. فِينَا نَشَبَتْ عُرُوقُهُ وَعَلَيْنَا تَهَدَّلَتْ غُصُونُهُ. In us are sunk its veins, the veins and the roots of oratory and rhetoric. And upon us are its branches. Lao Tzu, in his book, the Tao Te Ching, which means the meaning of the path, he has a word in which he says, knowing others is knowledge. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is power, is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. Not bad. Really, it's not too bad. The message is quite obvious. That in order for you to master others, to outpower others, is a good thing. But perhaps more important than that is to be able to master yourself. Listen to Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib. He says, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He says, ميدانكم الأول أنفسكم فإن قدرتم عليها فأنتم على غيرها أقدر وإن عجزتم عنها فأنتم عن غيرها أعجز. Listen to the beautiful metaphor that the Imam uses. He says, your prime battlefield is your own self. For if you are able to defeat it, then you're able to defeat anyone and everyone. But if you're incapable of conquering it, then you're even more incapable of conquering anything else. In other words, forget about other people. Let's prioritize. It's you and you alone you need to be focused on, not others. How beautiful is that? Another Chinese philosopher, Confucius, he says in one of his words of wisdom, again, I mean no disrespect, I just want to compare, and again, لا يقاس بآل محمد أحد. You can never compare anyone with the family of the Prophet. So we're not comparing, we're contrasting. He says, it does not matter how slow you go, so long as you keep going. Ali ibn Abi Talib begs to differ. He says, you know what? It does matter how slow you go. من تساوى يوماه فهو مغبون. If today and yesterday are equal, if you achieve the same amount that you achieved yesterday, فهو مغبون, then you're at a loss. In other words, you're a loser. ومن كان آخر يوميه شرهما فهو ملعون. And if today, at the end of today, you analyze yourself and you've achieved less than what you achieved yesterday, then you're cursed. In other words, you're driven away from the blessings of God. من كان إلى زيادة من لم يكن إلى زيادة فهو إلى نقصان. Anyone who's not progressing is in fact regressing. If you're not making headway, then you're going backwards. وَمَنْ كَانَ إِلَى نُقْصَانٍ فَالْمَوْتُ أَوْلَى بِهِ مِنَ الْحَيَاةِ. And if you're regressing and going backwards, then you might as well just be dead. Which is another representation of a mathematical reality, which is that if you have a distance from point A to B, say a meter, if you travel, if in the first step you travel half the distance, so you end up at 50 centimeters, then in the second step you take, you have the first distance that you traveled. So instead of 50 centimeters, you go 25 centimeters. And in the third step, you have the second step and you travel 12.5 centimeters and so on and so forth. You'd listen to that and you think, well, you're going slowly and you're regressing, you know, but you're going ahead anyway. And that's what matters, right? Wrong. Because mathematicians, theoretical mathematicians say, it is impossible for you to reach point B. Literally impossible to get there. And one way to explain it would be to say, what divided by 2 equals 0? And of course, it's a fallacy. There is no answer to this equation. Ali ibn Abi Talib, his words, his wisdom, compared to anybody else, is just a comparison that should not be done. What I want to conclude with, brothers and sisters, is that the Ahlul Bayt have a great deal to teach the rest of the world. I mean, when I hear things like democracy and how important it is to bring democracy to the Muslim world, I sit down and I think, we don't need democracy. You know what we need? We need Aliocracy. Democracy is what we need when we have these oppressive, tyrannical regimes that have deprived us not of the ability to flaunt our flesh in public. You could do that anywhere. You could do it in Saudi Arabia, and people do it in Saudi Arabia. You could do it in Iran. You could go to the most conservative Muslim nation and flaunt your flesh in public. You could drink in the most holy cities, such as the city of Mashhad and the city of Najaf. You could do those things. Saddam never deprived his people of doing immoral things. He deprived them of the ability to demonstrate their faith, to practice their religion, to go to mosques unhindered, to sit down and pray to their Lord without fear of persecution. That's what we need. We don't need a democracy. We need an Aliocracy, in the sense that a democracy is a reflection of the will of the people, the will of the masses, which is wonderful when we have those regimes in the Middle East. We certainly need that. But Islam and the Ahlul Bayt school of thought goes 1,000 steps further by saying, no, it's not just a mere reflection of the will of the masses. The head of state has to be the servant of the lowest person in the state. The head of state, Ali ibn Abi Talib, is responsible. He says, if a goat gets its foot stuck in a bridge while crossing that bridge to the other side of the river, I'm personally liable for that. I'm personally responsible for that. Now that's a democracy. That's what we need. And so the Ahlul Bayt school of thought has things that are news to the most advanced civilizations. What we have to offer, brothers and sisters, is something that the world is thirsty for. There's so much thirst. Let's try and help give people what they really need. And the way to do that is to start with our own selves. The way to do that is to learn about our own heritage. The way to do that is to utilize digital media. To go into, we've been talking about media. And the topic of the lecture is the media of the Ahlul Bayt. I'll tell you what the media of the Ahlul Bayt is comprised of. It is comprised of using modern tools that are at the disposal of anyone and everyone, anywhere in the world today, in order to convey that message in its raw form. You really don't need to change anything. You don't need to make any modifications to make it perhaps more compatible with modernity or Western culture. You don't need to do that. لو عرف الناس محاسن كلامنا لاتبعونا. They'll follow us. And one thing that we did, and there are many efforts around the world, I'm the first person to acknowledge that, and I'm the first person to encourage that. We need not one TV channel or one film or one production company, brothers and sisters. We need at least 300 of each. There's 500 million of us. Let's have 500 channels. Let's have 500 movies. Why is it that Bollywood, how many movies do they produce on an annual basis? I think it's on average 2 movies a day in Bollywood. 2 or 3 or something along those lines. It's just crazy. Why can't we do the same thing? While maintaining quality. I'm not just saying we should go out there and produce movies, but what we need right now is to encourage amateur videographers to produce their own films, to encourage amateur producers to come up with their own documentaries, to have as much volume as possible, so that in time that volume will be translated into quality. That quantity will become quality, inshallah. And today we're seeing examples of quality that we couldn't even think were possible 10 years ago. Who would have imagined that 10 years ago? 10 years ago, think about it. The best thing we could hope for was to maybe get a spot on some local TV channel talking about the contribution of the Muslim community in a certain town or city. That's the best we could ever hope for. Today, brothers and sisters, we have the world's first English language TV channel broadcasting the pristine message of the Ahlul Bayt around the world on 3 satellites. The Ahlul Bayt TV channel started about 5 or 6 years ago. Now there are 18 Shia TV channels that are based mostly in the Middle East. But they're mostly in either Arabic or Farsi. There are a couple in different languages as well. In English, we only have one, which is truly tragic. Why is it that we only have one? Why is it that this one single channel is still suffering financially? Why? Why is it that instead of being on 18 satellites, it's only on 3? The God channel is broadcasting its message on 18 satellites. CBN, which is the channel owned by Pat Robertson, Christian Broadcasting Network, has an annual budget of $2 billion. And the Ahlul Bayt TV channel suffers despite having a budget of roughly $2 million. Again, there is so much yet to be done. There is so much that we need to sit down, discuss, come up with effective means of applying what we already know to be the truth and nothing but the truth. We know what needs to be done. The problem is when it comes to practicalities. And I'll conclude with this. There are so many examples to cite of how people are influenced by the message of the Ahlul Bayt without any effort being exerted. As I mentioned, the Wahhabis, they put a sword on your neck and say, you either follow me or I behead you. That's how it works. In Iraq, they used to come up with people, show them a picture of the shrine of Imam Ali and say, you either spit on this or I'll have your head right now. And I myself had friends who perished because of that. But that's the Wahhabi mentality. That's the mentality about which Amir al-Mu'mineen speaks when he says, يُلْبَسُ الْإِسْلَامِ لَبْسَ الْفَرْوِ مَقْلُوبًا. Islam will be worn like a sheepskin worn inside out, which is both uncomfortable and ugly. It's not pleasing to the eye. That's what they've done. They've hijacked our religion. Brothers and sisters, it's time we reclaim our faith. And it's not too hard. All we have to do is tell the world what we're all about. There are so many examples. I'll just mention very quickly 1 or 2 of them. The first is a brother that I spoke about in an article that was published this past Arba'een in the New Statesman, which is the British equivalent of Time magazine. And basically a brother I met in Sydney, Australia, and he'd converted to Islam. But unlike 99.9% of converts, he had embraced the Ahlul Bayt school of thought while entering the religion of Islam, without going through the whole labyrinth of ideas and ideologies and becoming a Wahhabi, then a Salafi, then a Sufi, then this and that, until becoming a Shia. He actually became a Shia. I said to him, you know, that hardly ever happens. What made you choose the Ahlul Bayt school of thought? He said, you probably won't believe this. I watched a 30-second news report about the first visitation, the first pilgrimage to the shrine of Imam al-Hussein in 2003 after the fall of the tyrannical Ba'athi regime in Iraq. As I sat down watching 7 million people flocking from all corners of the nation, instead of going to Baghdad, where all the action is, where, you know, everybody's trying to get a piece of the action, everybody's trying to loot something or steal something or meet with the Americans and get some sort of a government position allocated to them or whatever the case was. Instead of doing all that, they were flocking on foot to this city I'd never heard of before, Karbala. What's happening in Karbala? Is it some sort of a resort town? Is it a place where, I don't know, all the leaders of the Shia world are living? No! There is a shrine. A person who, in his view at the time, is dead. And they're walking to that shrine, risking their lives. There were still a lot of Ba'athis around. There were still a lot of people looting, a lot of, you know, gangs operating in the area, abducting people, killing people. He said, I saw these individuals risking their lives, carrying banners that say, Ya nafsu min ba'd al-Husayni huni. O self, the words of Abu al-Fadl al-Abbas, after Hussein you have no worth whatsoever. I sacrificed myself for this man, Al-Hussein ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib. And they went to Karbala to visit Hussein and Abbas. Who's Abbas? Hussein's younger brother, who was killed and martyred while trying to fetch some water for his brother's thirst-stricken children. And one question led to the other. And before I knew it, I embraced Islam by walking through the gate of Hussein. That's one example. The other example is an email that I got while I was in London a few months ago from a sister identifying herself simply as Hannah Andrews. Now, she said, my name is Hannah Andrews. And inshallah, I'd like to edit that portion out of the lecture later, because she said, I don't want to be identified in the UK, because she's still, a lot of people do not know of her. She said that my name is Hannah Andrews, and I'm the daughter of Christopher Andrews. And I'm thinking to myself, hang on a second. Western people, English people, do not introduce themselves by mentioning their father's name. Usually that doesn't happen. And then she goes on to say that I'm mentioning my father's name because in Christian circles, my father is one of the most staunch atheists in the United Kingdom. A published author, someone who travels the world preaching the message that God does not exist. And yet, even in this atheist home of ours, I've converted to Islam and to the Ahlul Bayt school of thought. Right now, she said, and her story is a long one, I don't want to go into detail. She ended up converting, and then she was abused by her father. She had to get the authorities involved. Imagine, as an atheist, your daughter converts not to Christianity, not to Buddhism, which is the next sort of fashionable trend these days, not to any of these religions, but to Islam, of all religions. He started abusing me. I had to seek help from the authorities. And long story short, I became a Muslim because of this channel. And today, and she said, and I quote, you do not understand the power of Ahlul Bayt. You do not understand just how important this channel is. And the message of the Ahlul Bayt, it's not about the channel, but the message that it carries. And she said that today, this atheist home of ours is home to the Ahlul Bayt TV channel. Brothers and sisters, let's start going through what we do. Let's conduct those SWOT analyses. Let's try and figure out where the problem lies. And I think one of the biggest problems lies in the fact that we simply don't appreciate TV channels. We don't appreciate digital media. We don't appreciate these things, even though, how many times have you sat down and heard people nag and complain about not having access to TV? How many times have we sat down and said, oh, we're not represented in the media? Well, today you can be represented in the media. Today, not even CNN and Fox News could ignore the pilgrimage to Imam al-Hussein on the day of Ashura and the Arba'in. They even have to mention those news on their TV outlets. They have to. We now have access. The question is, will we act? Thank you so much, inshallah. I think there's a short clip. I'm not sure if it's on this laptop, brother. Is it on this one? That I will cut short because I've already taken too much of your time. That introduces the Ahlul Bayt TV channel. There. Okay.